Hello, everybody watching. Thank you for watching this video. So I've just got done reading Making Work Visible, a great book by Dominica de Grandis, and I just wanted to give you some insight of what resonated with me throughout this book, in case this might make you interested in reading it or whatever. So I have 25 slides ready for you, and I'll try to just go through with them. I prepared this talk very, very quickly. I don't expect a lot of people to watch it to the end, but at least it's there, and I did my best. So the first thing I really enjoyed is this nice table at the beginning of the book where Dominica shows things you might hear like, oh, things take too long, not enough features get delivered. We should just outsource this to vendors. We need features to be delivered, but you just want to refactor architecture. And basically, these things all relate to a different thing we can measure to address this person's complaint. And so I just wanted to show this first out front. We can create some interesting metrics, and there's a nice table in the book about this. So this is the kind of thing I'm going to point out. There's no real order of this talk. These things that are in order of the book. So just moving on. Then Dominica moves on to discuss the five thieves of time. I think this is a central concept of this book. The first one is too much whip. This is the leading thief. All the thieves work under this one, but the other thieves are unknown dependencies, unplanned work, conflicting priorities, and neglected work. And so a part of this book, Making Work Visible, is finding a way to make the work of these thieves visible and trap them, basically. For example, when you tell someone, yes, I'll do that for you. For example, if someone drops in your DMs and they tell you, hey, can you just add me this permission real quick? And you tell them, hey, yeah, I'll do that for you. Well, going back to the thieves, whoops. Oh boy. Okay, this is not going well. Give me a moment. I lost my slides. This is terrible. This is terrible. This is falling apart super quick. Why are you doing this to me, Google? And we're live. All that pressure. Okay. So when you tell someone, yes, I'll do that for you, it's unplanned work. And so what you're doing is you're prioritizing that specific request over all the other requests in your backlog that are waiting to get prioritized and waiting to jump onto your board. And so this is something we'll come back to, but saying to someone, hey, can you help me? And you say, yes, I'll do that for you, actually might be very bad, and you're not even realizing how truly bad it is until you visualize it. So Little's law. What is Little's law? It's an equation between cycle time and the ratio of the average number of WIP and the average throughput. I found this relationship interesting. First of all, cycle time, if you see the picture at the bottom, is the time it takes you to do something. For example, if a pizza is ordered, is the time it takes to take the pizza, but it doesn't take into account how long the client has been waiting for their pizza. It's just the time it takes to do the actual pizza. And so this cycle time is the ratio of how many things you're working on divided by how many things you can get out at the same time. And what's really insightful in this law is that the cycle time gets bigger as you're working on more things at once. And so that basically the realization is that the more things you work on at once, the slower you're going to be able to work through all of them. Zombie projects. Zombie projects are projects that have low value and are barely kept alive, yet they manage to subtly siphon people's time and energy from higher priorities. And so when we find these projects, we have to be merciless and we have to kill them because we have to consider the incremental investment that we need to finish this project versus the economic return. If the economic return is lower than what it would need to finish it, just kill it. There is probably no value in keeping these projects alive and siphoning resources. Not important, but interesting realization that I did not know about is 2/3 of people are visual learners. And so this is interesting because visibility matters when a majority of people think in pictures rather than in words. What this means is that by making your work visible and creating ways to visualize your work and or your lack of work or your problems in your work. It's the best way to get as many people as you can on your side to understand, because two-thirds, if you just use words and you just show a screen full of words to people like I'm doing right now, well, you're probably missing two-thirds of the people watching, and only one-third are really understanding 100% of what you're saying. So interesting thing to know about. Next up, recommendation from the author is to create different categories of work. So, for example, she gives some examples: unplanned work, maintenance, business requests, team improvements. This is something you can put in your Kanban, and basically these you can categorize based on where requests originate from. The author recommends between 3 and 7 categories as the sweet spot, and so once we do that, then we have different categories of work, and we're able to know what type of work we're working on. As a team, we should discuss which work type creates the biggest problems for our team, and understand why. So I found that interesting. Next up, the 5 reasons why we take more work than our capacity. Going back to when you say to someone who asks you for 3 minutes of your time to do a little thing and you tell them yes, these reasons, we have to be aware of them so that we can better understand why we tell them yes, even though we probably don't have the time and we probably can't afford it. So we do things for people we like. We don't want to let our tribe down, and we get a rush of endorphins from saying yes. We like saying yes. Next, we fear public humiliation or getting fired. Optimism makes us think we can finish faster than actually possible. And the last one really hit me straight to my heart. Starting something new and shiny is a lot more fun than finishing something old and unglamorous. So we have to be aware of these and not fool ourselves into thinking that these are not the real answers, the real reasons why we take on more work than we should. We should also categorize the work in progress. I found this interesting. So um, Dominica is really adamant on putting work in progress basically WIP limits. But there's many ways to put WIP limits. You can put WIP limits on a person, on a type of work, on a category. You can put a WIP limit on anything. And so one of the suggestions that she makes is to create WIP limits based on different categories. These are different categories than the one I showed earlier. Here we have 3. I found them interesting. So the first one is silver bullets. So urgent requests, for example, that come from management. They're like, hey, stop everything you're doing because we're losing so much money right now. You have to work on this. And what's interesting is that Dominica assigns only one WIP as a WIP limit for a silver bullet. So this tells management, hey, you can always drop in and disturb us and make us do some unplanned work, but you can only do this on one thing at a time. You cannot tell us to work on 2 major unplanned things at once. You have only one. So I found that interesting. And you see that teamwork here has a WIP limit of 3, business request has 5. So we should determine our WIP limits. Very important to make sure that we have the best way of working. I'll get back to that later. Well, now I get back to it now. Why a WIP limit? It's because this limit adds tension to the system and it provokes necessary conversations. So in other words, I'll just read my slides. This is a bad talk, but I assume it totally. It forces people to innovate and resolve issues that prevent them from finishing their work. So let's say that someone named Felix comes to me and tells me, "Hey, sorry, my trash is shifting around in my feet." Felix tells me, "Hey, I really need this thing. It would be super nice." And I tell them, I can't. I really want to give this to you, but I have a WIP limit of 3 right now, and I can't take on more because my swim lane is filled with the WIP limit is full, whatever. But if I manage to find a way to finish one of these tasks and slide your task in there, then I can do it for you, and I'll be super happy, and I'll be more motivated to work through that limit and get your task in there so that I can do it for you. So this is good. Having a WIP limit, ironically, makes it so that people want to finish their tasks so that they can get in more work instead of just saying yes to everything and never realizing that they're taking on more work than they can. So we're going in a different direction now. Dependency matrix. Found this is interesting. So this is something we should build by listing all our different teams, and basically we go team by team. We say, okay, for example, designers in this picture, who do they depend on when they need their work? They probably depend on portfolio release lead. I don't know, whatever. But so you list all the dependencies that are necessary to get the work done. So this is already a good starting point, but then you identify the dependencies that cause bottlenecks in the entire workflow. So if, for example, you talk with designers and they tell you, ah, man, every time we work with developers, and this is always taking like 2 weeks longer than usual, and it's creating bottlenecks for us. And you can ask the developers what's really happening, and you can try to solve this bottleneck. So having this picture laid out in front of you, it allows you to know where to start looking to fix issues. Um, this one, I don't know if it's bringing a lot of value, but I found it really interesting and easy to implement. So it's to visualize interruptions, uh, to expose the unplanned work. So I already started doing it on my tasks. So you see here, I'm working on a task called configure authentication via Google, and there's 5 stars. Every time I was working on that task, and someone came to me and disturbed, not necessarily disturbed me, but made me lose focus because I had to work on something else, or like I had to drop work on this task and work on something else, I put a little star. And that was really useful because for me, it helped me remind me what I was working on. Like I see the number of stars augment, and it reminds me how many times I was sidetracked from this task. So it's a way of measuring, and it also exposes unplanned work. So if all our tasks on our board have 5 stars like this, then we know we have a problem with unplanned work. So this is something that's easy to track, and I already do it, and I find it's useful for me. A metric that was suggested in the book that I find useful is to measure the ratio of unplanned work and planned work. So this has the negative uh, the negative impact of every time you're triggering, you're tackling unplanned work, you have to create a Jira ticket for it. Otherwise, this doesn't work. But let's say you do that. This is fun because it will tell you month by month, or however often you measure this, uh, do you tackle the work you planned, or are you working on work that was dropped on you and that you didn't plan? Like, what kind of value are you delivering? Are you delivering unplanned value or planned value? And how is this evolving? Obviously, you always want to give as much planned value as you can, but this is an interesting metric that I had never thought about before. Okay, and then Dominica went on to talk about a story about the coffee cart at HP in the 60s that showed that consistency of break times can be very good. So in the 60s, there was a coffee cart at HP that went in the office at 10:15 every day. Boy, that must have been nice. But what ended up happening is that all the employees took their break at the same time to go to the coffee cart, and they would talk to each other, and they would work through problems like just random brainstorming with a cup of coffee in their hands. And so this consistency of break times allowed them to solve problems every day, and it was expected to solve problems at the coffee cart. The reason why it's interesting is that in the 70s, as a cost-cutting measure, HP removed the coffee cart, and it really negatively impacted HP as a company because a lot less problems could be solved relying on this method. They were not aware of the value of this method. So I don't think this is something that we can implement, but I think it's interesting to think about because if we can create consistent break times where people can just chat and discuss, maybe we can find a way to solve problems without having to recur to count on meetings and a lot of planning on that. I think this could be something that has a great value if we find a way to implement it somehow in our new hybrid modern world. Okay, backlog versus board. I found this really interesting. It cleared something up for me. Maybe this is obvious to the person who's watching, but for a lot of time, it wasn't clear to me when I create a ticket, should I create it in our backlog, in our board? What determines this? And the answer is we should always create every ticket in the backlog first. And so the reason is things that are in the backlog are options. They might never get done. They're just things that we know we can work on. Now, there is a line of commitment between the backlog and the board, and when we take a ticket from the backlog and we move it to the board, this explicitly says uh, or signals to whoever is watching this ticket has been prioritized, and we commit to doing it. Unless there's something out of our control and we find that there's no way of doing it, the point is it will not go back to the backlog. By definition, there's no reason for it to go back to the backlog because we committed to do this task to the end. So I found this visit very interesting because it changes the way I see the board and the backlog. So I'm telling this for you if you're interested. I hope you are. Stay with me here. We're on slide 16, doing great work. Uh, there were ideas about new columns for Kanban boards. So the first one is design. Uh, I think that's an interesting column, depending on how we can use it. But the one that I really, really liked is the validate and done column. So that's two dones in one column. So the validate column is its use is basically, let's say you're doing a task. Okay, you code your change, you have a PR, you review your PR, and it's done, right? It's merged in master. Then you would put your ticket to validate, and you would tell the responder or the requester of that ticket, hey, I'm done. Validate, please validate that this is working up to the specs you were expecting. Please try it out and do it. And then you set an expiration date. Like this person has 2 weeks to validate that it's done. And after that, it's marked as done because we cannot pile up these validates indefinitely. And the author says at first she began with 2 weeks, and then she gradually lowered it to 5 days so that we can validate quickly and keep work going through. Because the last thing you want is to think you're done on something because it's merged in master, but the person comes back to you and tells you, hey, actually, you didn't let me validate, but it's not done. You forgot some of this and whatever. So done. What this means is not only is it merged in master, but it's been validated and tried by the person who requested it, and they confirm that the task is correctly done according to their needs. Like the person's need is respected, and like it's already creating value. It's already creating value, and it's possibly already in the hands of customer, depending on who requested this change. Next up, the aging report. So this is to visualize neglected work. So neglected work is partially completed work. And so the way you would do this is you query your board to find the highest priority work that has been unmoved or not updated in 30 days. And so this can change. It can be 30, 60, 90 days, or if 30 days is too much, you can go lower. But 30 days is a sweet spot. And so let's say you have a list of many items. You select 7 to 11 of these items, and for each of them, you note how many days this item has been stale, what's the average cycle time for cards of a similar work item type take, because by then you've already categorized your work and you've already been analyzing it. So, and then you can say, how many days has the item been in progress compared to similar items? Then what is the cost of delay if the item is delayed another week? So the cost of delay can be like if you have a storage, how much does it cost not to have this particular piece shipped, like it's taking up space or whatever. There's always a cost of delay for everything. And so it's important to know if this ticket is not done for another week, it's not been done for 30 days, but another week, what's the consequence? And so if the consequence is bad, then you can consider lowering the WIP limit, reprioritizing things based on the cost of delay that you estimated, and then separate the high and low value items currently on the board to make sure that okay, we know what's important, we know what's not important. So if possible, you can do a blitz to deliver this lagging high priority item. Um, what Dominica says, and I've not written on the slide, but uh, every day she would do a 10-minute meeting after the scrum with between the person who requested the oldest item, higher priority item, and the person who's supposed to be delivering it, so that these people talk together and make sure that we understand what's happening and what are the consequences of not having this done and how can we get this done super quickly. So I don't know how useful it is for us in our current team, but I find it interesting that this is probably something we want to at least monitor or at least query once to know where we stand, have an idea. Good metrics versus bad metrics. So I found it interesting because Dominica explicitly says that good metrics show actual progress and reveal risk. And she's quick to point out good metrics, lead time, cycle time, WIP, aging reports, these are good metrics. Bad metrics are the number of story points, number of bugs in production, number of deployments to production, which I found interesting. I'm used to people saying the frequency of deployment to production is a good metric. So probably it is, but according to Dominica, good metrics show actual progress and reveal the risk. And I added a little note in there. The lead time and cycle time, they don't pause for any reason. They don't pause on weekend. They don't pause on holiday. So according to Dominica, she has a full chapter on this, on why we shouldn't pause lead time and cycle time on weekends. So I'll let you read it or ask me if you're curious. But I found this interesting enough to note it in this slide. Capacity utilization. She says that this is the Kingsman formula that I've plotted here. It's a formula that tells us how much waiting time should we expect for a process to get done based on a machine or a process or a human that is at X utilization. What we notice is past zero point 0.8 or 80% utilization, uh, the waiting time grows exponentially. And so she says that this is actually the real reason why companies have a 20% creative time policy. It's not necessarily to get bonus innovation. That can happen if companies are lucky, but what I find cool is that if you give 20% creative time, then this reduces the capacity utilization to 80%, and it reduces waiting time. So it gives a little bit of slack in the system so that if there's a crunch time needed and we have to get something delivered really, really quickly, then we have enough space, we have enough capacity to get it done. So interesting. This is something I really, really, really want to try out in our team. It's the time thiefogram. So the idea is super simple. On the left, we have four time thieves that are not too much WIP. So all the ones except too much WIP. And the idea is that we look on our board, and every time we see something that is either unplanned work or a ticket that is a result of an unknown dependency or a conflicting priority, or when we can flag one of these thieves in our board, we label it directly in our tickets, and then we chart it week by week to see how much tickets have been impacted by these thieves every week. And also, what we do is we sum them all up to collectively see the impact of time thieves week after week. Because when we sum unplanned work, unknown dependencies, conflicting priorities, neglected work, what we get is too much WIP. So this is why I said all these thieves work under too much WIP, or at least that's how Dominica explains it. I really, really want to see this in our team, and I'd be very interested to find a way to make these plots. Another plot we already sort of have in Jira is the accumulation of our tickets. Actually, I don't have a way to share my screen, but maybe you've already seen it in Jira. I'll share a screenshot later, maybe. But this is basically the cumulate. This is a cumulative flow diagram, as it's called, and it shows you the evolution of work. How does the amount of closed tickets grows, the work in progress grows, basically the growth of the backlog, um, or the to-do column in the board. I'm not really super sure what guidelines should we follow in this, but I think this is definitely a graph that we should like design for our team, because in this plot, for example, she says, well, I showed this plot to my management, and as you can see right after the arrow there was a WIP spike, meaning that the amount of proposed work grew larger, like out of nowhere, and this was enough for her to get an additional funding to get a new member or members in her team. So this is a really interesting graph. So I thought I should point it out. Lean coffee. Lean coffee is a way to have discussions where the agenda has been determined via a democratic process. Let me find my notes again about that because I find it's interesting. So basically, we block 60 to 90 minutes with everyone who wants to participate, and we tell people only one person speaks at a time. Participants should attempt to listen more than they talk. So we give 2 minutes to everyone to jot as many topics down as they can or as they want on post-it notes. And then everyone in the circle talks like 1 or 2 sentences about their topic just to make sure that everyone understands what they're voting on, because we're going to vote on these topics. And each participant gets 2 votes. So we look at the little sticky notes, and you count the votes. People have 2 votes. You may vote on your own topic. You may use both votes on a single topic, tally the votes, and sort the topics in order. And then you run the topics through a Kanban board directly on the table if you're doing it physically, or on a Kanban virtually. And you go through all the tickets, as many tickets as you can in the hour or the hour and a half. What you do for each topic, you set a timer of 5 minutes and you let the author of the topic lead the discussion. The facilitator should give everyone a chance to speak. Then when the alarm goes off, you vote using your thumb up or down. This is to say, do we want to continue discussing this topic, or do we want to move on to the next topic? So this is voted by majority. And you repeat this until the session ends. And when you're out of time, you conclude the activity with a round of closing comments from each participant. People may pass. I found this really interesting. I don't know how to implement this at Nesto. I don't know what goal we could set for this type of conversation, but I'd be really curious to know what type of insight we could get. For example, if we do this at a backend dev meeting to replace one backend dev, we have people vote on topics. I think it could be a way to get some really interesting discussions and insight. Finally, this is my last slide. So Dominica gives tips on how to do proper stand-ups. So she tells that there are things people do that I find we do that revolve a lot around what I did yesterday and what I'm doing. But this is not what we want to focus on. We don't want to focus on the people. We want to focus on the work. And the tips she gives to do that is, first, the board must be updated and accurate prior to 9 a.m. So that way, when we do the stand-up, we show the board to everyone, and we don't have to say, what are we working on, what have we worked. We can see it directly on the board. There's no ambiguity, so that's nice, and it's time not wasted. And then we focus on these 3 questions that she suggests. What work is currently blocked? That will tell us about the unknown dependencies. Then what is at risk of becoming blocked? This is to make sure we understand the work of thief conflicting priorities. And is there work being done that is not on the board, to make sure we spotlight current unplanned work, because that is also a thief. And I was about to say something, but I forgot. Yes, I remember. She says that the most useful part of the stand-up is the after stand-up. So she says, we answer all these questions, and these questions are to make sure that the board contains everything that we care about, and that we flag all the problems possibly on the board. But then after this stand-up is possibly the moment where we do the coffee cart from HP in the 60s. We take this 15 minutes to discuss among each other and solve all the problems we may have. I think this is already a little something we're doing, but if we're aware of it and we say something like, okay, this is the after Scrum starts and whatever, it should be a period we stick to till the end. Like we can leave before the after Scrum is over, but for example, Mathieu or people should give their time to make sure that, okay, if you have questions for me, I'll be there until 10 a.m. This is when the stand-up finishes. And the quicker we can answer these questions, the more time we have for the after stand-up. So I found this a really interesting way and very productive way to manage this thing. That's all I had to say. This was my quick presentation. So really recommend this book. Had a great time. There's more in it that I possibly could give in this little discussion. The next book I'm tackling is Project to Product. So if you want to borrow this book from me, let me know. Otherwise, it's $26 US, $33 on Amazon. Recommended, great book from IT Revolution, Dominica de Grandis. This is Felix signing out. Have a great Sunday, everybody.